Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz. It's a week till the beginning of September. And so time to do a September TBR or Pile of Possibilities, whatever you want to call it. And in fact, my September plans kind of fall into two halves. A kind of definite to-be-read selection of books, and then a genuine pile of possibilities that I will select from for the rest of my reading in the month. So, and I'll explain why as I go along. There are 3 reading events happening in September that I particularly want to be part of. Framed, the one about art, Straya September, read something from Australia, and Shorty September, read short books, all of which, appeal to me, and I've got things in mind for all of those. But first, a couple of things that don't fit with those. So, number 1, you know that Tilly and I, Tilly of Tilly's Shelf, my daughter, are reading a piece of new contemporary fiction each month this year, and having a discussion together about it, which we record as a video. And our September choice is by Elif Shafak, and that's There Are Rivers in the Sky. Came out a month or so ago. It caught Tilly's attention because it has kind of partly partly inspired by 4 different rivers, which I can see why that struck her as interesting, and so that's that one. Then a group of us that are connected to Sean Breathe's books as patrons are going to be reading a Canadian modern classic, and that's The Stone Angel by Margaret Laurence. Now, Laurence was from Manitoba, one of the sort of less well-known Canadian provinces, I suppose, but was one of Canada's sort of leading 20th century authors. And The Stone Angel is set in Manitoba, and it's the story of a 90-year-old woman and kind of looking back on her life. It was published in 1964. I'm really keen and interested to read that. Then my in real life book group chose a book that I'm very much looking forward to this month, and that's Claudia Piñeiro's A Little Luck. Actually, it was my turn to suggest the selection of books to pick that we would pick from, and I might put this one at the top of my pile when I was passing them round and seeing which we vote for. So, do you know Claudia Piñeiro? She wrote Elena Knows, which was quite a big hit so far as translated fiction is ever, a big hit in Anglophone countries, and this is by the same translator, or translated by the same translator, Francis Riddle. So I really loved Elena Knows, and I'm very optimistic about this one. It's 20 years after a shocking accident. Mary Lohan returns to the Buenos Aires suburb she escaped from in a fugue of guilt and isolation. Well, there's a good start, isn't it? And I'm loving the literature that's coming out of South America at the moment, particularly by women, or that we're getting access to, shall I say? Because this one was written in 2015, but is just now. English translation came out end of last year. So there we go. And there's a bit of a Women in Translation Month hangover happening for me in September, as you'll see as I go through the other things that I'm going to read. So those are the things that don't relate to a readathon. The next few definites do, okay? And I mentioned Framed. Now, Framed is a readathon about, it's hosted by Elizabeth of Bouquins and Books, Hanne of Hanne's Books, Lindy of Lindy's Magpie Reads, and Greg, another bibliophile, reads. And it's encouraging us to read books that are in some way about art, whether that's a novel where the arts in whatever form other than literature feature, or non-fiction about art. And I've picked a non-fiction book to read. This one, Spirit of Place, Artists, Writers, and the British Landscape. Now, this book brings together 3 of my favourite things: visual arts and writing, reading, writing, if you know what I mean, and the British landscape. So what's not to love? I think it's about how the landscape inspired some writers and artists to in what they wrote or the art that they produced. And so there's enough art in it to make it, I think, an acceptable choice for Framed. As part of Framed, I also have to go and visit an exhibition, and I've got one that I'm planning to go to in early September. It's about the art of Dorothy Hepworth and Patricia Preece. Now, I hadn't heard of them, but maybe you have. But they're a bit of a kind of an artistic mystery story, I suppose, because they're a couple. And the art that were a couple now, the art that they produced was sold and exhibited under the name of Patricia Preece, but was actually produced, it turns out, mostly by Dorothy Hepworth. But she was very sort of shy and retiring and reserved, and didn't want her name or her kind of her face out there. And so Patricia did that and said, "What a great story!" Anyway, I will report back if it's a good exhibition. Then we're on to Straya September. So every year, Scott has a go at geeing us all up to read a bit more in the way of Australian writers, because, they're often sort of, don't always get the attention of, in other sort of Anglophone reading nations, despite there being some great writers and great contemporary current writing happening in Australia. Now, one of the books that Scott kind of championed a couple of years ago, and I think was one of his sort of top books of 2020, was Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. And I think it's a book about a woman with, there's kind of a lot of mental health in it, but as Sorrow and Bliss, the title might imply. As I say, Scott strongly recommended it, so it seemed fitting to read that one for his reading event. That leaves me with Shorty September. Now, there's something about Shorty September that just really appeals to me, and I think to a lot of us, in fact, because it's about reading short things, and I love, the joy of a book that is short and intense. Good things in small packages. I love them. Novellas, short novels, poetry collections, whatever you might wish. It's hosted by Berta per Storytime, with a kind of cheerleader in the form of Heather, who used to be Soviet expat book nerd, but her channel is now called Too Many Heathers. And basically they say, read short things. There are a load of lovely prompts too, but I might retrospectively connect some of these with their brilliant prompts, but I won't yet, for reasons that will become clear. So I have two absolute definites for Shorty September, which I are both hangovers from Women in Translation Month, and one of them is Ti Amo by that's Italian, but it's a Norwegian author writing in Norwegian, Hanne Ørstavik, one of Norway's sort of best-known writers at the moment, and I've never read any of her, so what a disgrace. Now I will. It's translated by Martin Aitken, and apparently it's a book about grief. The protagonist, it's a novel, is kind of relatively recently married when her husband is diagnosed with cancer, and this is about him dying. That sounds a bit grim, but I'm quite interested in sad books. I don't dislike a book that's about a sad topic, and when it's less than 100 pages, that ought to be doable, oughtn't it? So tell me if you've read it and what you think. Then this one, Rue, which is translated from the French, and the author is Vietnamese Canadian. Now, I don't know if you've seen, but Jolene, Bookworm Adventure Girl, and Lindy of Lindy Magpie Reads have just done an exercise in getting people to identify what they think are the best Canadian books of the 21st century, partly in response to the New York Times list, which had virtually no Canadian authors in it, and so they thought they'd rectify that. And one of the books on that list, their list of 67, is this one, Rue, a novel by Kim. Now I should check how to pronounce this. Thúy, I think. Thúy was born in Vietnam, but then moved to Francophone part of Canada. So this is translated from the French by Sheila Fischman. It has a first-person protagonist. I suspect it may be a little kind of autobiographical, but it is fiction. And it starts in Saigon, where this protagonist is living in kind of quite a wealthy, high-status family, but then they have to flee. They end up in refugees in Malaysia. It's obviously Vietnam War related. And then finally in Canada, where and it seemed a good choice for Shorty September, also because not only is it a short book, it's only, less about 150 pages, but also it's written in short chunks. No, it's not like long stretches of prose. It's little bite-sized reflections, ideas. Yeah, but yeah, one that I've been aware of for a while, and this has kind of given me that extra shove to read it. I think it was published in French in 2009, and the English translation came out in 2012. So those are my definites for the month, along with my long, slow reads that I'm reading, which I've talked about before. So I think I might finish the Iliad this in September, though. We'll see. But I also have my pile of possibilities. Now, basically, these are all the other short books that I have kind of hanging around on my shelves that I've been meaning for a while to read and haven't got around to. So let's see how many of these 9 I might get to in September, and I will pick and mix from them as I fancy, see which I fancy. But I'm going to quickly run through the titles for you. So because you might want to particularly steer me to 1 or 2 of them, if you like, you could try that. Top of the pile, just because it's the shortest, not in length, I mean in height. So that's how I stack them. It's Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. So Edith Wharton, kind of classic American author of the early 20th century, and I love The Age of Innocence and the House of Mirth, and I've always meant to read some more by her and haven't. And this is a short one, and yeah, I thought I might go for that. This might be the month I finally get to it. Alan Garner, British author who writes kind of strange, kind of fantasy, mythological inspired, but odd books, some of which were written for children and I read as a child in the 1960s, 70s. This one, the Stone Book Quartet, is sort of geared more for adults, although it's also, it could be read by a child. It's for fables. Another book in translation, not by a woman this time, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, best known for writing the Little Prince, but this is 2 of his novellas written for adults. Southern Mail and Night Flight, they're both about flying, because he was a pilot in the early 20th century. Night Flight was came out in 29 or 30, I think, 1929 or 30. They're about the solitary experience of being a pilot. Something I've meant to read for years, so maybe. Then something more current, The Fell by Sarah Moss. She's a excellent writer. I think she's written 8. I think she's got another one out now, and that reminded me that I haven't yet read The Fell. I've read a couple of hers, Summer Water and Ghost Wall, both really interesting, although I had a problem with the ending of Ghost Wall. But was born in Glasgow, grew up in the north of England, writes books set in the north of England that have, where very often the landscape is a kind of key element somehow in the book, in the way she writes it. This is one about a woman who sets out for what's meant to be a short walk on the fell, and it doesn't turn out that way. Then, this is a book that is the film that was made of the book is much better known than the book itself. So it's Moonraker by F. Tennyson Jesse. You wouldn't know from the name, but She was a woman writer. She was born in 1888. She's the niece of Tennyson, the poet. And this is a kind of a ripping yarn and an adventure story about a boy who goes to sea and is captured by pirates. You can see why it made a good film. Not the sort of thing I might normally read, but it just sort of, I saw it in a second-hand bookshop and it struck a chord. Then this one is, back to translation, it's The Tale of Princess Fatima, Warrior Woman, which is like an abridged version of the Arabic epic of Dat al-Himma. And that's the only Arabic epic named for a woman, and it recounts the adventures of a legendary medieval warrior woman, Princess Fatima, a fearsome sword-slinging heroine. The author is sort of a little unclear, but because it's sort of it's a medieval manuscript and there's sort of little uncertainty about it. But Melanie Magidow is the translator and sort of editor of this Penguin Classics abridgment of the epic of a whole. Translated again, but back to women in translation as opposed to translation of a book about a woman. And this is Yell Sam, If You Can, by Mélis Bézerie, French author. This came out, it's relatively recent, and Steve read it and sort of pressed it into my hand. Yes, 2022 was the English translation, and it's like a novelisation. Well, no, but it's genuinely a novel about the last days of the life of Samuel Beckett, who was living in France at that point, as you probably know. It's translated by Cleona Riordan, Irish translator. So it brings that sort of French-Irish thing together. And Beckett, I find Beckett's plays absolutely fascinating. So, yeah. Interesting. Last two. This one by Jamil Ahmad is The Wandering Falcon. He's a Pakistani author. This was he wrote this in English though. He was a civil servant in Pakistan, and he worked partly on the sort of Pakistan frontier areas, where Pakistan, the valleys that sort of come up against Iran and Afghanistan, what are sometimes referred to, I'm not sure if it's in a racist way, I don't know, as the tribal areas, but and they proved a kind of happy hunting ground for the Taliban. And he wrote this book to sort of write about that area in the time before the coming of the Taliban. What was it like before the Taliban came? And some of those valleys are pretty much sort of no-go areas now. It's the area that Malala Yousafzai comes from. And it's, I suppose, exploring the traditional culture in a novel form of that area. And finally, last one, Quicksand by Nella Larsen. If you've read a book by Nella Larsen, I'm willing to bet it was passing. If you've also read Quicksand, tell me what you think of it, because this is the only other of her novels that's sort of readily available in England, at least. So she's a Black American author from the sort of early part of the 20th century. This one is quite short, and I don't know that much about it, but I really found passing both an enlightening and enormously rewarding read. So I'm hoping Quicksand may be as good. There we go. So that's my definites and my pile of possibilities. I'm really looking forward to September. But then every month I'm really looking forward to what I'm going to read, aren't I? I hope you're looking forward to your September, and maybe you're going to take part in Framed or Straya September or Shorty September or some other reading event that I'm not. So tell me more if you are. And see you soon for an August wrap up.